Welcome back, Focus Learners, to another Explainer. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on what has to be one of the most massive world-building literary projects in human history. We are looking at a 12th century universe of stories from the source material that essentially shaped Western mythology as we know it. I actually like to think of it as the medieval MCU. It's this deeply interconnected web of heroes, magical artifacts, and secret histories. But here's the catch. Unlike modern comic book movies, this universe wasn't created just to entertain people. It was created to rule them. You know, when we think of King Arthur drawing the sword from the stone, or brave knights venturing into these dark, misty forests looking for the Holy Grail, we usually assume these are organic folktales. We picture these stories being passed down around campfires by peasants and traveling bards over hundreds of years, right? Well, what if we throw that assumption completely out the window? Let's open up this historical cold case and ask a pretty massive question. Who really invented the Holy Grail and King Arthur?
Okay, let's dive right in. The source material reveals a totally paradigm-shifting reality. These legends, they were actually part of a highly calculated public relations campaign, and it was engineered by a very specific network of dynastic families, primarily the Blois dynasty. These guys were descendants of Guillaume de Guillaume, and they were deeply involved in the Crusades. They essentially utilized these mythical narratives deliberately to encode their own sacred lineage and cement their real-world connections to military power. They weren't just telling stories, they were weaponizing them.
So, Section 1, The Secret Mythmakers, meet the Blois dynasty.
Right at the absolute center of this aristocratic literary network was a man named Henry of Blois. He lived from 1096 to 1171, and he was the abbot of Glastonbury and the bishop of Winchester. But more importantly for our explainer today, researchers point to Henry as the central architect of these legends. He was the mastermind, the main hub pulling the strings of both literature and politics. He realized that to legitimize his family's immense power, he couldn't just rely on wealth. He needed to give them an ancient, divine origin story.
Now, what's really fascinating here is how this completely shatters a major historical illusion. For centuries, the accepted myth has been that a Welsh cleric named Geoffrey of Monmouth just organically wrote the wildly influential History of the Kings of Britain. That's the text that gave us the legendary image of King Arthur and the prophecies of Merlin. But the reality? Scholars, including Francis Lott, postulate that Geoffrey of Monmouth was actually just a pen name. Literally, a fake name used by Henry of Blois himself so he could operate this calculated political spin machine without tipping his hand.
And Henry didn't just stop at King Arthur. He's also believed by researchers to be the true author behind Perlesvos. This was an anonymous old French Arthurian romance, and it's a super vital piece of the puzzle because it explicitly links the Holy Grail to a secret, sacred lineage. So the crucial takeaway here is that Henry was writing his own family's esoteric status directly into the pop culture of the 12th century. He was basically telling the world, hey, we aren't just nobles, we are the guardians of the divine.
Which brings us to Section 2, the Templar family tree, encoding a sacred bloodline.
I mean, just look at this staggering network. On one side, we have the Prince's Crusade, which was led by Henry's father, Stephen, Count of Blois, and his mother, who is the daughter of William the Conqueror. Then you have the Templar founders. That includes his uncle Hugh of Champagne, who was literally a founding member of the Knights Templar, and his brother Theobald II, who helped officially endorse the Templars in 1128. And finally, they have ties directly to the Kingdom of Jerusalem through his brother, King Stephen of England, whose marriage connected them to Godfrey of Bouillon and Baldwin I, the very first rulers of the Kingdom of Jerusalem. This wasn't just a family. This was a medieval superpower deeply embedded in the origins of the Knights Templar.
Of course, this legendary evolution didn't happen overnight. The Grail lore evolved right alongside the family's rise to real-world power. In 1128, the family helps endorse the Templars at the Council of Troyes. Then, by the late 1100s, Marie of France, who happens to be the niece of Henry's brother Theobald, is directly sponsoring Chrétien de Troyes, who is one of the most famous Grail authors in history. And by the early 1200s, Wolfram von Eschenbach writes his massive epic, Parzival. They were literally financing the writers who were busy writing their family legends.
Which brings us right to Wolfram von Eschenbach. He wrote that his version of the Grail story was the accurate one, specifically claiming his source had genealogical records. He wrote, the Grail was guarded at the castle of Montsalvage by a brotherhood of knights called the Templison. He explicitly linked the Holy Grail to a baptized brotherhood of Templar knights. Think about that for a second. He anchored this mystical, elusive religious artifact directly to the Blois family's real-world military order. Because if you control the Grail in the stories, well, you control the ultimate moral authority in reality.
All right, moving to Section 3, the Swan Knight lineage, escalating to the bizarre.
Okay, this is where things get kind of crazy. Once they secured the Grail and Arthur, the dynastic claims started getting even wilder. To elevate their ancestry, this crusading family actually laid claim to descent from a mythical avian warrior known as the Knight of the Swan. According to the medieval texts, this Swan Knight's daughter, Ida, was the mother of Eustace III and Godfrey of Bouillon. Those are the first crusade leaders we just talked about. And because King Stephen of England married Eustace's daughter, this Swan Knight lineage became directly tied to the English crown itself. Wolfram von Eschenbach even integrated this into the Grail epic, making Parzival's son the Swan Knight Lower Engren. They were literally writing historical fan fiction about themselves being descended from magical bird knights just to legitimize their rule.
Let's look at Section 4, Melusine and the Macabre, Dark Magic and Crusader Skulls.
So, the stories weren't all shining knights and holy artifacts. Prepare yourselves, because we are transitioning to the darkest spoke of this literary universe. The network surrounding Henry of Blois was also responsible for popularizing the legend of Melusine. She was a fairy, specifically a half-woman, half-serpent water spirit. This legend was reconstructed in the 12th century by Walter Map. Map was a Welsh poet. He was heavily involved in compiling the Vulgate cycle of Grail legends, and he was a close friend of the extended royal family. He used this mythical serpent woman's tale to politically legitimize the ancestry of massive medieval powerhouses like the House of Lusignan, the House of Anjou, the Plantagenets, and the House of Luxembourg.
But Walter Map definitely didn't stop at serpent fairies. He is also the original source for a terrifying Crusader legend known as the Skull of Sidon. The story goes like this. A lord of Sidon mates with his dead wife's corpse. He is later instructed to return to her grave, and when he does, he finds a magical skull and crossbones. This dark talisman supposedly granted immense power. Over time, this specific necrophilic tale became directly associated with the Templars. It tied specifically into the accusations that the Templars worshipped a severed head known as the Baphomet. It was this dark smear that ended up sticking to the very order this family helped create. Now you might be wondering, where on earth did they get these bizarre, dark ideas? Well, scholars trace both the Skull of Sidon and the Melusine myth directly back to Eastern and Scythian lore that was brought back by the Crusaders. And here is the truly fascinating reality behind these tales. These myths are born from a very real collision of cultures. As these European nobles invaded the Middle East, they absorbed local folklore, brought it all the way home, and just seamlessly wove it into their own family branding. And we can see this cultural absorption happening in real time. For instance, Baldwin II of Jerusalem married an Armenian noblewoman named Morphia of Armenia. They had a daughter, and her name was Melisine. Notice how Melusine directly evokes the name of the serpent fairy Melusine. Melusine passed this intertwined heritage of fairy bloodlines, Grail mythology, and Templar occultism right down through the Crusader kings of Jerusalem and Cyprus. Real, historical women were being actively mythologized by their descendants to project this aura of mystical authority.
So that brings us to the end of our explainer today, and it leaves us with a pretty critical lens we can apply to our own world. We've seen how the Blois dynasty took their political ambitions, disguised them as timeless mythology, and managed to shape literature for 1,000 years. So the question I want to leave you with is this. If the legendary tales of King Arthur, the Holy Grail, and the Templars were actually a 12th century dynastic spin campaign, what modern myths are being engineered by today's powerful dynasties, and what realities are they trying to hide? Keep questioning the narratives, focused learners. See you next time.